Wherever you are in the world, welcome to another edition of Jerry's Take on China, and I'm Jerry, of course. This will be the first of a short series I'll be making about alliances that China is involved in. Hopefully, as we go through, you'll learn a little, as I know I have already done since I started the research. Our world is full of acronyms and abbreviations, and because I live in China and I do a lot of research about what China's up to in the world, I do get asked a lot of questions about their involvement in these organizations. China is not involved in NATO, that's the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, although there are moves afoot to bring Australia and some other places, even China's province of Taiwan, into something called a NATO Plus group, which seems to be a long way from the North Atlantic, making NATO a misnomer and more of a geopolitical alignment than a geographical mutual defense organization. But that's another story. This is the story of Asia and the Pacific region, and the acronyms which make up this part of the world. I'm often asked, what's the difference between ASEAN and the RCEP? Or does BRICS mean something to do with the Belt and Road Initiative? Or how is One Belt, One Road different? And how does the SCO or Apec fit into these things? This series will address these questions. The first part will look at Apec and the G20 because they're both happening in the next few days and both in this region. The Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, Apec. It's a forum designed to secure growth and ease administrative burdens for the 21 members, of which both the USA and China, as well as Chinese Taipei, are included. It has a permanent office called a Secretariat in Singapore, and it meets regularly. The Apec CEO Summit for 2022 will take place in Thailand on the 18th and 19th of November. The G20 Summit will take place on the 14th and 15th of November. So many people will head directly from one in Indonesia to the other in Thailand, and that's causing some people to think they may be the same or similar things. Well, they're not. They're quite different. First of all, APEC includes many less developed countries, but none in Africa, and only two, Peru and Chile, in South America. Although Mexico is technically part of North America, that's also included. Canada, the USA, Russia are represented, but the vast majority of members are located on the western side of the Pacific, north of New Zealand, south of China. And a glance through the topics which APEC covers will show they are very much focused on trade and economies. They work to enhance cooperation in things like digital technologies, health and education, deregulation, energy, finance, and many others, but all within the Asia-Pacific region. The G20, on the other hand, is focused on global issues. As the last summit leaders' declaration from Rome last year announced, they met there to address the day's most pressing global challenges and to converge upon common efforts to recover better from the COVID-19 crisis and to enable sustainable and inclusive growth in our countries and across the world. A glance through their topics to be discussed shows far-reaching and a much more global focus. On the agenda of the G20 in Bali, there will be, under the slogan, Recover Together, Recover Stronger, three main topics: global health architecture, digital transformation, sustainable energy transition. Each of these main topics is supported by a series of fora, 13 in all, which allow for discussions by hundreds of delegates throughout the year who will make recommendations. It is these people who do the work in the G20, not the leaders who attend a 2-day summit once a year, the heads of these states of 20 of what they say are the world's richest nations. But to say they are the top 20 is wrong. Spain is a permanent guest and not a full member, but would be number 14 if it were counted in the top 20. Argentina and South Africa, numbers 21 and 33 respectively on the same list, wouldn't even be members if it really were the top 20. But the G20 does account for 80% of the world's GDP, and it represents 19 countries, or 20 if we count Spain, and one region. the EU. And these all come from the top 33 economies of the world. It's fair to say that there will be some metaphorical, if not actual sparks flying as Biden and Putin share the room. And at the time of writing, Ukraine's President Zelensky has declared he will not attend if President Putin is going to be there. However, it remains to be seen if he will accept President Joko Widodo's invitation, and he may attend virtually. Biden has already suggested that Russia should be removed from the G20, but then again, Biden said a few things which his State Department or his White House administration have needed to walk back before. And there are many pundits who claim this meeting between them will be announced imminently. This meeting can't be ruled out, and this meeting is under discussion, but we'll know for certain in a few days. One thing is absolutely certain: there will be a number of speeches denouncing Russia in this summit. But what will be most interesting to me will be to see which countries, and I know China will be one, who do not denounce Russia. Those are the countries that are in the G20 for its genuine, peaceful reasons rather than political gain. The problem with the G20 is that it's most unusual in that it doesn't have a charter. The rotating president sets the agenda with the help of the preceding and succeeding presidents. This is known as the Troika. So it's a little hard to define what's the purpose of the G20. And this allows leaders to choose whether they want to contribute to the global benefit, they want to gain political capital, or capitalize on an opportunity to better things for their own nation. G20 is complicated. Many people say it's nothing but a talk fest. But there is evidence that much of what's done is done behind the scenes. Others beg to differ, saying that the results are usually to the benefit of the countries that they represent and would likely have been achieved anyway, even if there weren't a G20. So, the G20 has both supporters and critics. But an impartial observer would probably note that the meetings which go on all year behind the scenes do indeed have the ability to move the world forward in positive ways. The two-day Leaders Summit, which is the part that gets all the headlines, absolutely is a talk fest. It's a range of photo opportunities, achieving little except handshakes, talking points, headlines, front-page promos for each of the member countries' leaders. These leaders have the opportunity to describe targets and goals related to how their country can contribute to global problems such as climate change, war, and pandemics, as well as improvements in global health, global security, global education, employment, gender issues, and other things. But what some leaders do instead is they aim for sensational headlines, which they hope will boost their election prospects the year after or the year after that. In 2021, for example, one of the key takeaways of the entire summit, and one which Joe Biden in his closing speech was extremely pleased about, was the introduction of a minimum 15% global tax on corporations, something America had been working towards and pushing for a long time. However, 1 year later, it looks unlikely that the EU could achieve this before 2024. Switzerland cannot achieve this at all without a change to its constitution, and the USA, the proposer of the strategy, is still working on how to implement it through its complicated legislative structure, which is heavily supported by lobbyists and donors who don't want to pay this tax. He went on, Biden, to suggest that he, with Prime Ministers Johnson and Merkel, his words not mine, and President Macron, had decided diplomacy would be the best way to deal with Iran, and that's something his State Department doesn't seem to have received the memo about. There hasn't been much in the way of diplomacy where Iran is concerned. He also notes that his Build Back Better plan, which, God willing, his words again, would be voted on next week, would help Americans. Clearly, God was not willing, because that piece of legislation is still stalled due to one member of his own party rejecting it. In fact, much of his 5-minute speech was related to American workers, American benefits, and of course American leadership, which probably indicates the critics of G20, at least as far as the US are concerned, are absolutely correct. There's more talk and headlines than actionable policies. So, Apec and G20 are two very different meetings happening in the same region, but because some of the attendees of one will attend the other as they move from their meetings in Indonesia to more meetings in Thailand 2 days later, some people are inevitably linking the two and thinking there could be some benefits in cross-referencing issues. But the fact is, APEC and G20 are poles apart in their ideologies and their membership. One creates legislation, one wants to cut through legislation. Their purposes and even their alliances are different. Nominally, both groups have 21 members, and there are 9 countries which are members of both. And since they serve different purposes and have entirely different agendas, members might very much agree with the initiatives of the G20, but vehemently oppose initiatives put forward by APEC or vice versa. One thing is quite certain though, China and Russia, being members of both, will be more favorably received at APEC, as many of the membership countries rely heavily on them for trade, while at G20, a membership that's made up more of the elites representing 80% of the GDP and 70% of global trade, while the reliance is still there for China, it's a lot less so for Russia. The 21 members of APEC represent 60% of GDP and 48% of trade. If we take the US and China away from that, that will drop their contribution considerably. If we take the same contribution away from the G20, that group still controls a significant percentage of the world's economy and its wealth. Clearly, there will be some leaders, some ministers, and many representatives of the 9 member countries of both groups attending both major international meetings, but when they leave Indonesia and head to Thailand, they will need to put on a very different thinking cap and handle things in a very different way. Thanks once again for watching Jerry's Take on China, and if you like this, please like, subscribe and share, and I'll see you next time.